My name is John. I'll be the chair for this round. My preferred pronoun is he. Judging with me, I've got
Abigail, preferred pronoun Jure. And me, Jure, please.
If I can go around all the teams and make sure I've got various people in order. So, who's in opening government?
Oxford RJ, who is speaking first, please.
Okay. Got it. Opening opposition.
Tejaswini speaking first, Jure this one, thank you.
I'm Rory second chief, please, and it's Durham A.
Got it. Closing government.
Stanford CM speaking first, Danielle Mitalipov.
Speaking second, Andrew, please. Yoki, and closing opposition.
Speaking first,
Got it. Okay. Unless there are any questions at this point, then I would like to invite the Prime Minister to speak to the motion that stands in their name.
Yeah, 1 second.
This is fine. Also, this one can I just highlight this speech contains a mention of sexual assault. It's not graphic, but the word is there. I've noticed that currently there's a weird lacuna in how we perceive law and legal systems to operate, right? In a sense that we believe that there's this weird thing we have with action, omission, distinction, right? Whereby the state actively removing someone from the society is somehow seen as categorically different than letting hundreds of people, right, be endangered by the actions of that one person, right? We think there's nothing inherent about the action, omission, and distinction, right, that we should fetishize as a society, which is particularly true if we believe all the members in question, right, are equal members of the state, while the state should equally protect, right? The second weird thing about this, right, motion, is that we by and large all probably agree that in many circumstances in human society, right, we already believe that it is better to sometimes get things wrong and then rectify things on a larger scale, right? Like, for example, in civil court proceedings, right, we do go for a 50-50 burden rather than an unreasonable doubt, right? The reason for that is because we really fetishize people's, personal ability and liberty to move around so much more than, the money that buys their food, the money that sends their children to school. We don't think there's any inherent reason for that to happen, right? A couple of things in this speech. Is it a clarification? No. Okay. Firstly, on practical justice and how does this change things? And secondly, on the principle, why we think it's a good one and a legitimate one. So in practical justice, right? Notice, one observation before I start this argument. Oftentimes, it is adequate, and the standards we have in the criminal system are probably adequate, right? We by and large probably get things wrong. We would observe that the reason why we oftentimes do is the areas where the evidence is particularly hard to gather around cases, right? Unfortunately, that oftentimes those are the cases that are very, very particularly pernicious to the society, right? And even if we believe that they weren't, there's no reason to treat them differently than all the other cases of crime and assault or whatever restriction on people's liberty that we currently do, right? We know for a fact as a society that 98% of people accused of sexual assault are guilty and roam the streets free, right? We know for a fact that financial fraud is particularly hard to prosecute because there's no evidence of collusion. We know for a fact that hate crime is particularly hard to prove because you can't prove the person's intention because of a particular statement, right? There's nothing inherent that says that with all those information and knowing that statistically the person committing those crimes and being accused of them is likely to be guilty, that we should privilege them in our court proceedings. Nonetheless, we do so to a much larger extent than the kinds of crimes where we know the evidence can be gathered and is gathered, right? So what is the quality of that argument, right? Firstly, we believe that by lowering, a criminal standard, or if you want to have a principled or practical debate, it's up to you. We don't think it really matters, right? But by saying you would rather have one innocent person go to jail than hundreds roam free, there are practical consequences to that. Firstly, you're just able to convict more of these people, right? So 98% of people who are victims of sexual assault now get some sort of solace and can see that justice is being prosecuted. But not only that, they're actively encouraged to pursue justice, right? They're actively more encouraged to report the crimes that happen to them because they can see something is being done in a vast majority of cases, right? This is equally important for hate crime, equally important for financial fraud and collusion and embezzlement. They literally robs thousands and hundreds of people of their savings, of their earnings, right? This is important because it incentivizes people to report things to the legal system and it makes them regain trust in it. I like opening.
The reality of the situation is that in cases of collusion or in cases of sexual assault, all of the evidence is he said, she said. This isn't something that is switched with a marginal reduction.
I don't. First of all, this is not going to be marginal. It can, and we're happy for it to be reasonably significant. Right? I literally cited civil law at the beginning of this case, right, as an example of this. And like probably there's a balance point, but I can't give you what it is, right? Because I don't have a PhD in maths, neither law, right? So let alone both, right? But like there's probably a balance somewhere, right? And what the standard is going to be, right? But like importantly, I don't think it's always he said, she said, right? Oftentimes you have some evidence, you have like some corroborating witnesses, right? And like even then, right? You can oftentimes have these things like judgment of character, right? You can analyze things that are preceding events, right? Not that, for example, everyone who watched a Kavanaugh trial pretty much thinks he's guilty, right? And there's probably a reason for that, right? Even though you can criminally prove he is, right? You have the statistics of what the likelihood is, combined with all the circumstantial evidence, we think there should probably be enough. No, thank you. The deterrent point then, right? Not only is this really important, right, because now these people get solace and justice and report crimes more, but it's also important because people stop acting like utter dicks, right? Because currently a lot of the reason why you do that is because you know you're going to get away with it, right? Because you have the same statistic of knowing if you commit a crime, there's a 98% chance no one's going to hold you to account for it, right? We think it's utterly crucial and detrimental for us to rectify that because it means that people now are held accountable, not committing crimes in the first place. Sliding into the principal part of this case, right? Look, we think that the state has an obligation to maximize the rights and the safety of majority of citizens, right? And here's what we think happens on the right side of the house. We think that apart from that one person, which I'm going to come to in a moment, vast majority of people are unaffected by us lowering this criminal standard or however you picture this being, if it's a principal debate or not, again, up to you, right? Because, and the reason is this, most people don't spend their days thinking about what's going to happen if I get convicted of a crime, even less so what the standard is going to be in court if I have to appear in front of one, right? So vast majority of people aren't affected if they are potential perpetrators. They are, however, affected if they're potential victims, right? Because there's hundreds of them, as the motion posits, and every 100 of those people who are like roaming the streets can also hurt more than one person, right? So this is literally thousands of people's safety, savings, earnings, whatever you want to call it, right, on the line that are affected by this. It's just a massive number, disproportionate in terms of numbers. Now, the only group that I can think of that you might say is affected by this actively are people who are disproportionately prosecuted by the criminal system. We tell you, oftentimes, it is not the burden of proof that those people have a problem with, it is police and the courts disproportionately attacking them. Oftentimes they settle for plea bargains, right? We don't think that motion affects them in any meaningful way, right? Note, for that one person that is sent to jail, obviously this makes a difference, right? So why should that be weighed less than the safety of thousands of people? We think that person's liberty is contingent on other people being safe and the state providing a liberty in the first place. The reason why that person had a liberty in the first place is because people who felt safe and were able to function had the money to build roads, right? Because like people who weren't colluding to invest the funds were able to send them to school, right? Were able to give them money and to build houses in which they can actually exercise that liberty. We don't think that person is owed anything by the state if they can be instrumentalized for the greater good of the society that provided them with that right in the first place, because their right of theirs would not exist without a society in itself, right? Why do we then think this is a legitimate trade-off for the state to make, right? Because no, we think that if you imagine entering a fictional society tomorrow, I think any one of us would rather have the guarantee in a warrant that they're not going to be a victim of a crime to a much larger extent than in the current society, then they would knowing that there's a slightly increased chance that they might go to jail had they ever been accused of a crime, right? This is a trade-off that I think intuitively I'd be willing to make. I think it probably also appeals to your intuition. I can't prove it, but I think it's universal enough for it to stand in this debate. I'm incredibly happy to propose.
No, that's actually not I have very small arms.
Okay, I'd like to now speak that speech and invite the leader of the opposition to take the floor.
As a state, we create a justice system to protect people who should,
but to also make sure we can stop crime, right? On both of these grounds, opening government is losing already. The reason is because we're not really providing protection to victims, because the person that actually committed the crime is still walking around scot-free and they never engage with that alternative. But the second thing is also that you actively create the creation of more criminals because more people are resentful of the state and because prisons are incredibly bad at correcting behavior, and this is only going to make sure we have more overcrowded prisons and a much worse system because we have no incentive to fix the structural problems when it looks like the justice system is functioning perfectly, which is the perception that they really want to create because they think there's a problem right now, and the problem has been fixed, right? Three things I'm going to talk to you in my speech: why we actually owe a duty to innocent people and why we fail in that duty, why we fail in the duty we owe to victims of these crimes, and why generally, like, analyzing who exactly we sent to jail and why this makes for a much worse society. The impacts of this are things that I already hinted at in terms of creation of more criminals, in terms of making society just generally more unsafe, and why we fail in all of those grounds, right? But before that, just a few pieces of responses. So their case is literally, let's just have a civil case of like civil burden, a balance of probability, and like, let's just I just think they misunderstand the reason and rationale behind the creation of the burdens of proof, right? The reason civil case has a burden of balance of probabilities has a twofold. A, because of the harm that comes out of the civil case to the individual victim, and B, because of the proportional response that you need to create in order to fix that harm, right? Oftentimes, civil cases do not physically harm that individual, and the consequence of that does not have to be the same extent of having to send people to prison and ruin their lives forever, right? Like, there is a clear trade-off, and the reason for that is because of the consequence of the action that the state has to take, and the state is the only person that can take that action. And secondly, when they talk about, oh, you know, there are certain crimes where you really can't prosecute because of a lack of evidence, yes, that's true. It's unfortunate that that's true, but this doesn't fix it. Because a lot of the cases that they were talking about oftentimes do not have enough evidence to even pass in the balance of probabilities test, right? The only people that will pass in the balance of probabilities test are the people that you already have subjective biases against, and the people that juries are more likely to believe are capable of committing this sort of crime, and the people that you're probably more likely to capitalize on. Because the people that actually get away with this sort of crime, and often from the majority, have strong acquittal. It's not like there's some doubt about whether they did, but it's not beyond all reasonable doubt. It's oftentimes that there's no doubt at all, and oftentimes it is incredibly pernicious because they try to shut down the voice of that victim. And the problem with these sorts of crimes is that people don't often report them, and they're not really fixing that because they're not really sending those people to prison in any meaningful sense. So I don't think they actually solve that, and I don't think they actually answer Rory's PY when they say you don't even have the evidentiary requirement of getting this prosecution in civil cases most of the time. And saying there's a witness there doesn't necessarily solve that, because the witness also equally does not have enough credibility in terms of, because the witness is also someone saying something and not necessarily, like, unless you have like perfect proof, and that if you have that, you're more likely to get a conviction anyway. So I'm not sure if they understand how that works. And lastly, I think it's crucial to point out that lowering the burden of proof doesn't just lower it for one specific crime. They can't just selectively choose the crimes they want to apply this for. They have to universally apply this, right? If they're universally applying this, you're not just sending one innocent person to jail, you're sending hundreds and thousands of innocent people to jail, but crucially, you're also letting guilty people walk away as well on your side of the house, and that's incredibly damaging, because when you send the innocent person to jail, you think this case has been solved, and you don't have to go after the actually guilty person, and I don't think they're ever going to get true justice on their side of the house. I actually think it's an appalling world to live in. Why do I think it's appalling? What duty do we owe to the innocent person? The reason we even have a prison system is because people subscribe to it, people have some faith in the system, and they think that there's going to adjudicate based on truth, and they actually have some voice in this criminal system, right? The reason we have a high burden of proof is because you take away inalienable rights that you recognize you have to give to everyone. It is not just fetishization of freedom of movement. I fucking think freedom of movement is huge to me when I actually cannot see my family, I cannot talk to people I love, when I didn't do anything wrong, right? It's not just freedom of movement that you affect, it's also like the consequence when you come out of prison, the stigma that you have to bear, the stigma that your family has to bear, the fact that you can never get a job again when you didn't actually commit a crime, the fact that your community is going to be penalized for this when you didn't actually do something wrong, right? The consequences of prison are huge. The fact that you have to probably endure violence in prison, the fact that you don't actually get to choose anything that you want for your life is incredibly damaging. You lose years of your life you can never get back. It is an irreversible permanent harm that you can never reverse, and it's incredibly damaging if you do that to someone who didn't commit a crime. But the main problem here is that they don't recognize that the consequence of sending an innocent person to prison is that it really doesn't have the deterrence effect that they want. In fact, it has the reverse effect. You actually create more criminals and more reoffenders. The reason that is true is because of how broken the prison system currently is, and the fact that in prisons, because of the high risk of violence that you have and the threat of being around prison, and the fact that guards don't actively take care of you, and in fact are the ones maybe even perpetrating the violence in of itself, you actively have to create some sort of network. You have to find someone who's already powerful and is going to be there to stand behind. You actually do have to engage in this sort of behavior, have a community that will back you up so that you don't get beat up by other people there, and that often leads to you pledging to help them even when you go out of prison, if you do go out of prison, right? That often leads to creating networks that you even end up having to re-offend even when you get out, or having to support a criminal, having to support a gang when you're there. And the reason you're more likely to do that even now is because you resent the state even more for putting you in prison when you know you're innocent and when you know you've done nothing wrong. People are going to be more angry, they're going to lose more faith in the system, and they think there's no point even of living a law-abiding life. Because even if they live a law-abiding life, they're going to prison anyway. So what is the point? You might as well get the benefit of having the gang or being in that system, right? And I honestly just think they have no really effect of deterrence. In fact, they only create more criminals. I'll take over.
Yeah, that might be true in the United States. It's probably not true in Sweden, right? If you want to trade examples, that can literally be a non-debater.
No, I'm sorry. I just think that in a majority of cases, prison is in fact incredibly damaging. The consequences of going to prison in Sweden include the same problems, right? Like the fact that you still have to be able to take away that sort of inalienable rights, the fact that the individual is still going to hate the prison system for forcing them in that place. The reason why you fail your duty to victims is because I already told you that the actual person that committed this harm is unlikely to ever been prosecuted. If you close the case and you're like, we sent the person who committed this crime to jail. Where is the actual justice for the victim, for the person who actually committed the crime against the victim? The second thing is that there's no real true closure if the individual is never going to be rehabilitated, never feels remorse because they didn't commit the actual crime. The third thing is that this doesn't take away, this doesn't fix anything in terms of how victims perceive the justice system, because the justice system is actively sending more people from their community to prison, and they are actually creating a new victim when you put an innocent person behind bars. Lastly, in terms of who you prosecute, I think it's a flippant thing for them to say, oh, the only harm is for people who are disproportionately prosecuted, because they're the ones who are the least help in terms of political support that they can get, right? Which means you have no incentive to fix the structural part. You don't fix the structural problems. You only reinforce and play right into the hands of biased juries and racist juries. This is maybe not the best system, but this is basically the only structural check they can have to protect their rights, to protect their liberties. The fact that there is a high burden of proof that even they have to meet, right? The only thing where you can hold them equal under the law, and I personally think you're never going to get to that state if you side with government. Please oppose.
No one denies that going to jail as an innocent person is bad. The thing is that our contention was also that if you're a victim and the person who committed that crime remains in your community, that's also bad. I don't think there was any explanation given on their side of the house why the duty to those people who are going to jail is greater than the duty to the victim, especially since there's significantly more victims being harmed under their side of the house. I don't think just explaining that we have a duty to the innocent person is enough. There are a lot of duties in this debate. The question is which we should value more, and whether we should value the numbers of which they affect. That's what this debate is about, not like whether duties exist at all. A few things are rebuttal, and then I'm going to explain how this fundamentally harms the ability of the justice system to help other people outside the remit of the crimes that we're specifically discussing in this debate. But firstly, a rebuttal. So I think the first thing that comes up is that they question this idea of the burden of proof and the balance of probability. So the first response they have to this is well look, a lot of these cases wouldn't pass the balance of probability either. Yes, that is true, but significantly, clearly a much higher number would pass the balance of probability. Those people clearly should be being incarcerated. I don't think we have to say we're going to incarcerate everyone. I think that's a reasonable burden. But significantly, Jure's case was not just about the existence of the burden of proof, although that's important. The important point you made is that juries are often affected by this rhetoric too, right? The entirety of the justice system is built on the idea that action is significantly worse than omission. So if there's a borderline case and you're not sure, it's pretty much the vast majority of sexual assault cases are, this rhetoric that pervades pretty much all of our discussions about the justice system tells you that it is worse to send that innocent man to jail than to let someone walk free. So you should always err on the side of sending that person free, because it is worse to actively send that person to prison than let them walk free. The problem is this rhetoric massively affects high burden of proof, which actually does affect sexual assault cases, for example, recently in Ireland, but also affects the way juries and other people see justice. That's really important. That's a problem under their side of the house, and that's why they didn't really engage with the majority of Jure's material on that, because we think that under our side of the house we are significantly more able to actually incarcerate people for crimes who otherwise will always walk free by changing the rhetoric and the way we perceive the justice system. That's really important. Secondly then, in terms of response, the idea that like they have, I think the majority of their cases basically have a duty to innocent people because prison is really bad. Firstly, yes, we think that we agree prison is really bad. We also think being a victim of crime and that person walking free is terrible. Let me tell you why you should value that more. Firstly, we just think on a pure numbers game, we're not sure why like prison is so much worse than like being a victim who has been like violated in every way possible and then has to see that person out on the streets or know that they are likely to commit those crimes to other people. Pure on a numbers side, I think we should win. But secondly, more importantly, for the justice system particularly, no thank you. Firstly, the justice system should probably care about justice for most people. Every court in the world knows sometimes they're going to make some mistakes and they accept that. What they try and do is make sure that they get the best like decisions the most number of times. That's what we stand for on our side of the house. That's what a justice system should care about. But thirdly, as I'm going to comment on to go by some stats in a minute, a justice system should also care about ensuring that it continues to have bias, so it can just continue to exist as a functional justice system. That should probably be pretty high up on its list of aims. We achieve that better under our side of the house, as I'll come on to later. No, thank you. Finally then, they suggest that like this idea that people will be really resentful and actually go on to commit crimes. Firstly, I think, again, like, this is just one guy. Unless he's going to go out like proselytizing crime to everyone in a really convincing way, I think this is relatively limited impact. But furthermore, again, as I'm going to come on to in my substantive, I think that this idea of resentment is a lot worse when people who are completely innocent in society are constantly witnessing crime being committed because these people have been let free. That's when you get mass resentment. So all of them know about why resentment is bad actually falls under our side of the debate. Before I continue, I'll take closing if you have POI.
If it would reduce crime rates, would you allow the torture of people who've been found guilty in jail?
Okay, that's clearly a completely different debate because this, like, the justice system is always going to make some mistakes. So even under the status quo, when you're not having a debate, some people always get sent to prison. We accept that. That's why we have a burden of proof, and we appreciate sometimes we get it wrong. This debate is in a world where this justice system is always going to fuck up, so everyone is always sometimes setting some people free or putting some people in jail, what should you value the most? That's the premise of this debate, so I don't think that's really within the remit of the debate. Moving then on to substantive. I think that obviously 100 guilty men walking free massively affects the material safety of other people who are completely outside like the particular criminals or innocent people that we're talking about in this debate. We think firstly, from a utilitarian standpoint, it's highly likely those people are going to continue to commit crime and create significantly lower safety levels, which is something the justice system should care about. But more importantly, we think that it also affects the ability of that justice system to continue to function. So there's been this contention up so far in the debate, the idea that like who is more likely to be incarcerated? Is it likely to be minorities in society? So options tell us that yes, like the people, this one innocent man is always going to be the minority. Firstly, I would say that oftentimes, the reason why, for example, African Americans are incarcerated more is firstly because of policing, which isn't within the debate. Secondly, because of plea bargains, which presumably exist on either side of the debate. So I think most of the problems you're talking about, and actually simply don't change in this debate. The same problems exist. However, what is true is that these minorities are significantly likely to be disproportionately the victims of crime. The problem that happens on their side is not only these people likely to just continue being the victims of crime, that's just absolutely shit for them, but more importantly, when you see those criminals around, you see crime repeatedly happening, you feel much more abandoned by the justice system. You're much less likely to think that people are actually working for you. You're much less likely to report that crime in the first place. The problem is that the justice system rests on a fundamental principle that people are likely to believe that it's generally keeping them safe, believe that it's worthwhile to report crime even if sometimes it poses a risk to you. When you fundamentally undermine people's ability to actually put trust in that justice system and report that crime, it prevents the justice system from doing anything significant in society. The thing is, therefore, is when you're weighing up which side you should go with in this debate, it's clearly more important to weigh up a side that actually allows the justice system to continue doing this, even if it's occasionally making some mistakes. The only way you do that is by getting wide social buy-in. Fundamentally, people are willing to accept some degree of mistake in the system. Most people are aware of the fact that sometimes some mistakes will be made. One innocent man may go to jail and one innocent man may walk free. What they cannot accept is 100 criminals being set free in society, creating a significantly larger amount of time that they're significantly more likely to witness. That is when the low-level resentment of one individual that they wanted to talk to you about on opening opposition fundamentally does start to undermine how justice works, because you make these communities significantly more distant from the justice system, significantly less likely to report it in the first place. That's the fundamental problem with their side of the house. Fundamentally, you have to weigh up whether you think that the overall mass social harm that you get on proposition is less important than their supposed duty, which they have given us so far no metric of how we should weigh this in the debate in comparison. We think the justice system should care about several things. We think, firstly, it should care about the extent to which people feel that justice is done to them on a mass level. We think, secondly, it should care about protection. And we think, finally, it should care about its ability to continue to do justice in the future. Not just for the people that we are talking about under the status quo, but those people in perpetuity. You only allow the justice system to do that under our side of the house when you ensure that you don't get mass growth of resentment, you don't distance communities eternally from the justice system. That's why you should vote for opposition.
Speech and invite the deputy leader of the opposition to take us away.
The justice system is currently structured around the idea that opposition is defending, which is that we would rather have an innocent man walk free and have 100 men that are guilty walk with him. That means that CROP's burden in this debate isn't just to literally say we would rather there be one innocent man in prison and then 100 people who are also in prison. Their burden is to defend that they prefer a world in which that is what we value. That means that they have to defend the restructuring of the justice system around that idea. So it isn't enough for them to say, no guys, like look, it's literally a balance of 100 men versus one. This debate is about how you change that justice system when that is what you value. And that is where all of Teju's harms come into play. And that's why, unfortunately, I think they fail to actually weigh them up against the harms that they bring themselves. Rosa says in her speech that this debate is about justice for the most people. In that tally count, recognize that you need to account for the victims that government bench creates by putting those innocent people behind bars. You can never change the fact that a crime happened. We would beg you not to make victims that never existed in the first place. So, in this speech, I'm going to go into a bunch of clash, proving why either the things that they say are just untrue or comparatively less good than what my partner brought you, and then boil down at the end of this speech with a couple of questions that we think you need to answer in order to win this round. So the first thing that they tell you is that there's nothing inherent about the distinction between a victim and somebody who is an innocent man who's put in prison. Maybe that is true. I think the reality of this is that one of them has already had that harm done to them. One of them, neither side can change, neither can make the victim who's already had the crime happen to them not a victim anymore. If there is no moral distinction, we think that government bench would probably agree that that person who is now innocent should not be made a victim anew. And I think that's probably something, in terms of them saying there's not a distinction, that actually damages their own case. But let's look at the cases where they say this is different. So they're probably, as they said in the first speech, lowering this to more of a civil case standpoint where it's a balance of probabilities. They say that this is going to be largely beneficial in cases where you're dealing with like collusion or cases where you're dealing with sexual assault. Specifically with sexual assault, they're using statistics to mislead you because they give you the 98% statistic. That is mostly because people never come forward because police advise them not to. That doesn't change because police advise you not to when you literally have no evidence. The reality of the fact, and it fucking sucks, is that it is almost always going to be he said, she said. It's going to be was it consensual, was it not? You don't change that. You never change the evidence, the bare minimum threshold to even have a trial. And as a result of that, we think that this largely falls out of the debate. But furthermore, because they have to apply that to other types of crimes, I think what Teju tells you is actually largely true, which is you have a lower burden of prosecution. Prosecution becomes easier, but you can't try two people for the same crime. So you try somebody, you convict them of the crime, they might not even be the person who committed that crime in the first place. So the functional idea of justice is something that is destroyed by this lower burden of prosecution for the vast majority of crimes. Because recognize that the vast majority of crimes are not collusion and sexual assault. They are things that this burden is fine for. And so on a numbers game of which crimes we're dealing with, I think it really sucks. Please trust me that I do. And I think we need to reform the way that we deal with sexual assault, but lowering this burden is not the way that we do that. A secondary harm of that is that what do you tell the women who only win these trials now that you've lowered that burden? You tell them you could never have proved that before. This burden was not enough. This burden was not fair. This isn't something that actually happened, and you invalidate them more. You make their lives materially worse. And I simply do not think that this is fair, nor do I think that they're ever going to win on that point whatsoever, the point to which like the people who go behind bars aren't even necessarily the people who fucking did it. So, then they say, we aren't incarcerating everyone, so this isn't a harm that exists on our side of the house. Like, it's not actually that bad in Sweden, and that's something that you should value in this debate. They said that we can't play example tennis, so what I'm going to do is weigh up to you whether it is likely to be very shit in prison or whether it's likely to be fine in prison. Recognize that the vast majority of prisons in the world don't actually exist in Sweden or even the US or even like the UK. They exist in the developing world, right? Like, we know for a fact that the human rights abuses that occur in developing world prisons are pretty bad. We know that prisons in India, prisons in Bangladesh, prisons in like South America and a large number of those countries are likely to simply manufacture more crime. And so I think in terms of a balance of who you victimize further, is that if you've made more criminals, more vicious criminals in that prison, recidivism rates are actually more likely. It's actually in those countries truer that people become more vicious criminals than they would have been if you never incarcerated them in the first place. So let's say somebody does something like collusion, let's say somebody does petty theft, you put them in prison, they become violent criminals involved in cycles of gangs. That is something that materially means more crime, worse crime on your side of the house, and crime that never would have been there in the first place. We would literally, like, rather there are tons of, like, non-violent criminals that you just don't imprison because we think that that is probably more effective, that you never distance them from society. If it is a balance of who creates more criminals, this motion started with 1 victim and 100 criminals, all that you get on government bench is 2 victims and 101 criminals. I think in terms of the balance of what you create in this round, all that you get on their side is more criminality, fewer victims helped, worse treatment of people who do try to come forward for the worst types of crimes, and that's probably really, really bad. I think you not only victimize the people who are innocent, but you re-victimize the people who tried to get those crimes prosecuted. Go ahead.
So even if I agree that one person is going to become a worse criminal, they're not going to be 100 times worse, i.e. because there's 100 criminals now.
No, you missed the entire beginning of my speech, which is we're prioritizing what stance the justice system takes. You're going back and forth as to whether or not you think it's literally 1 person versus 100, or whether or not you think it's the entire system. I think when we're dealing with what we prioritize, you needed to justify why, like, this motion literally meant 1 versus 100, rather than what you said at the beginning of your first speech, that it's about what our justice system values. Given currently, we value it a certain way, that we would rather 1 innocent man walk free and 100 men that are guilty walk free with him, I think that you need to defend that justice system valuing something else, which doesn't literally just mean 1 person going to prison, although I think we win there as well, right? When we win in the fact that I think that those 100 people who were criminals are likely to remain the same sort of criminals. I think under your side of the house, they become worse criminals, and I think that that innocent person is not victimized. So even if it's a question of literally 1 versus 100, I think that we win on our side of the house, especially when we deal with the fact that like the people who are likely to be the extra people sent to prison are not going to be people who are any more guilty than anybody else. It's just like they said, they are the people that the police pick up more often. So they are the people who get in courtrooms more often. So they are going to be the young black American men that are picked up on the street because police literally have quotas for how many people they give a ticket in a given day. This is the type of world that you live in on Gov Bench when in fact you have a lower burden of proof, because these are the people that it is easiest to demonize in terms of those character witnesses that they say. These are the people that we already have biases against. And so in terms of putting more people in prison, we think you are disproportionately likely to create social harm because you reinforce narratives that these people are inherently more criminal. Because I think we prove that we have less criminality, fewer victims, I'm very, very proud to oppose.
I'd like to do a speech and invite the government to take the floor.
Opening opposition is factually wrong when they claim that this is a guiding principle of legal and judicial systems in the status quo, because recognize that, for example, in the United States, beyond a reasonable doubt usually means 90% chance that the person is guilty. If we extend opposition's principle to its logical extent, you would probably have to require a 100% certainty that that person is guilty, right? Because if they think that that one person, innocent person going to jail is not worth 100 men going free, then they probably necessarily must believe that one innocent person going to jail is not worth, for example, 1 million guilty men going free. And if they do think there's some distinction, I challenge them to name what it is, given that the principle seems to me that you should never put somebody in jail unless you're 100% sure they committed a crime. The problem is that it is impossible, factually impossible, to be 100% sure that any given person ever committed a crime. That's what we're going to give to you in extension. We're going to talk to you about how this literally leads to collapse of judicial systems. But first, a few extraneous pieces of rebuttal. The first thing we hear from opening opposition is like, you can't help the victim who was already hurt, it's all in the past. So first of all, you can help them in two very meaningful ways on our side of the house. Firstly, through retribution in the healing system of seeing their attacker go to jail and having the justice system validate them and say, we heard your truth and this is your justice we are serving you. But secondly, by incapacitating the person who hurt them, so they don't have to live every second of the rest of their lives worried that their domestic abuser, the person who sexually assaulted them, will one day come back and do it again. The next thing they tell us is that sexual assault victims often have shoddy evidence and it's he said, she said. Like, this is true, but given my overview, by their principle, even a 99% guilt likelihood of somebody, like you literally have video evidence of somebody committing a crime, is not going to be good enough. I'll tell you why that is the case in extension. The last thing they tell us is that jail actually makes these criminals worse. First of all, as OG pointed out, I doubt it makes them 100 times worse, so at that point, the mathematical calculation is on our side. Secondly, it is not the case that these are all people guilty of petty crimes like smoking weed, right? Some, and perhaps many of these people, are guilty of violent kinds of crimes that mean they are likely to reoffend in the future to the point at which they already are able to morally allow themselves to hurt another person like that. But also, what's more likely? An innocent person becoming criminal because they went to jail, somebody who was innocent to begin with, or a person who is definitely a criminal committing another crime and you let them go free. I think one of those, no thank you, is more likely than the other. In extension today, I want to do a little more pushing forward to the philosophical work that we heard from opening government, then I want to tell you about some practical impacts. Let's do some framing. If one of those guilty 100 men, just one, hurts or kills somebody else, then you should probably vote Gov. Why is this the case? First of all, why is it likely that they will do this? Of these 100 people, some statistically, and in fact many, were likely to be the perpetrator of a violent crime, that is, sexual assault, or hurting somebody, assaulting somebody, killing them in fact. We think that it is very likely this is a solid portion of those 100 people. No. We think these people are guilty of a fundamental criminal pathos, like at the point at which you can bring yourself to hurt another person, despite what society has told you all along is wrong. If you can look somebody in the eyes, somebody innocent, and hurt them and inflict pain on them, we think you are very likely to do it again at the point at which you were able to justify it once against an innocent person. We think that if this results in even one more death, in one more serious trauma or injury because you let these pathologically guilty people free, people who are likely to reoffend, we think that you should vote Gov because no, death is way worse than life in jail. This is just true because your right to life precedes any right to autonomy or any right you can have at all. It's a pretty stock argument, yeah. But the next thing to say here is that trauma and injury are pretty similar to being in jail. At the point in which you're robbed of your autonomy and freedom, you are jailed by your memories, you're jailed by your injuries, you think every night about this horrible, horrible thing that happened to you and you know had that person been jailed the first time, it would not have happened to you. Meaning that person's autonomy is limited in a way that is equal to the innocent person going to jail. At the point in which you believe that is likely to happen, we think you should probably vote Gov. But even if no additional person is harmed, we think that the 100 people, or maybe some of these are victimless crimes, we think pretty close to 100 people would have already been concretely hurt on their side of the house, right? They have to deal with physical and emotional trauma, which is intensified on their side of the house when the perpetrator goes free for two key reasons. One, as I mentioned, you get no justice through retribution, through speaking your truth and beginning the healing process, and having society say, yes, you were wrong, this person did a horrible thing to you, and they should go to jail and be punished. We think that in and of itself is a crucial first step to the healing process and to overcome a lot of the emotional trauma that is true in many of these crimes where you are a victim of some sort of violence, whether that be sexual violence, physical violence, intimidation, all these kinds of things, no thank you, that we think are the worst kinds of offenses. But secondly, as I mentioned earlier, your attacker goes free. Your violent husband who abused you for all these years, a person who sexually assaulted you, someone who statistically you considered a friend or you knew, and who is very likely, or at the very least you know, can come back and hurt you again at the point in which you know they are walking free. This means that this leads to A, fearing your daily life that this person will attack you again, but B, intensified trauma because you cannot heal because you were not able to pursue the justice system, which is the whole point. We think retribution is an important point of the justice system. That means things like you were afflicted by PTSD and it's hard for you to get and keep a job. It's hard for you to move freely and safely outside your house because you're worried about seeing your attacker on the street and being paralyzed either emotionally, mentally, or like literally physically hurting you in a second. Sorry. At that point, you are robbed of your autonomy in a way that is meaningfully similar to the one innocent person who has to go to jail. Or even if it's not completely identical, it's probably at least 1/100th time as bad, mathematically speaking. Sure.
The answer is that on your side, both the innocent and guilty person will reoffend unless you plan on incarcerating people forever. So on the comparative on your side, you have more offenses.
It is not clear to me why an innocent person who goes to jail is likely to be criminally changed and come out of jail and decide that they want to hurt someone given that they were innocent in the first place. But even if that is likely, we tell you literally in rebuttal that it is more likely that the person who was guilty of a crime in the first place and let go is definitely likely to reoffend. No, thank you. We also think that jail is just not that bad. Contrary to what OO says, you can retry your conviction, you can possibly be found innocent later, you can get out eventually unless you have a life term. You have some autonomy, food, shelter, libraries, schooling, exercise, you can join a debate team and beat Harvard. Things, right? And historical trends point to the fact that jails are actually getting better and more humane, contrary to what we hear from OO. But second, crimes become impossible to prosecute. Beyond a reasonable doubt doesn't mean 0% chance of guilt, right? That's what officers stand for, because if they think one innocent person going to jail is better than is worth 100 people, then they probably also must principally think that it is worth 1 million guilty men going free, because those principles carry over. That means you can never trade off with efficiency and catching probabilistically guilty people principally on their side of the house. So even if camera saw you like kill somebody, hey, we probably can't prosecute you because who knows, there's like a very 0.001% chance that that film was doctored or somebody set you up, or the person on video is just someone who remarkably looks a lot like you. And at the point which principally on their side of the house you can't prosecute that person means you literally cannot prosecute anyone. You can't send anyone to jail, you can't enforce any laws, you can't incapacitate the worst and most dangerous people who are likely to commit all these crimes we tell you about. There is no deterrence. Many innocent people are harmed irreparably. We think as far as outweighs the harm to one or a few people who go to jail, we think it is not that bad, and we are incredibly proud.
I'd like to start that speech is the opposition military law.
I think that around 95% of what has been said in this round so far is strictly irrelevant to the question of the motion. The entire OG case was that we know that 98% of sexual assault of people accused of that are guilty, and that means we should lock them up. That is what the motion is asking us to debate. You're saying that yes, we know most of these people are guilty. The question is, should we lock them up? OO tells you the state looks up a lot of people in the wrong way because of racism, because we get things wrong and we're not epistemically perfect. That's fine. We are saying though, if we know they're guilty, if we know they're innocent, what principally should we do? What should the state care about? The only relevant part of the OG case, for the most part, is the act-omission distinction, which they correctly identify at the top of their speech about being what this debate is about. We're going to give you a conception of the liberal society, which tells you why, for a government, there is an act-omission distinction. That the government is a contractual obligator that lets individuals pursue their own conception of the good instead of maximizing social outcomes like they want on their side. Quick, straight bits of rebuttal to OG. They say that the social system needs buy-in. Right? That basically the criminal justice system will fall apart if people stop believing into it. Notice that as of right now, the Blackstone principle is largely believed in all of English common law, most of our societies, and we have no crisis of legitimacy in the criminal justice system. I don't think that makes a ton of sense. The next thing they say is if you live in perpetual fear of crime, you can't actually actualize yourself and have a good life. Just like you need an education, or just like there's basic social and economic rights, living in a safe society is a basic right, which means you can't access your good. That is a conception of the liberal society you want to engage in. Why is that wrong? I think that material is wrong because in the vast majority of countries where we have the Blackstone principle, people are not constantly living in fear. People are able to actually live reasonably good lives. The areas in our society which do have prolifically high crime rates and need to be solved, like the exceptions, like sexual assault and particularly high crime neighborhoods, the problem is not the Blackstone principle. The problem is a lack of police-community interactions. The problem is that we treat sexual assault in a crazy way in our society, disability of sexual assault victims. They haven't shown you why in these cases, where there is meaningfully high crime in our society, the Blackstone principle is what causing it. We think that for the most of these things, like racial issues, sexual assault issues, are terrible, we need to address them. The Blackstone issue itself largely works in the vast majority of our societies. We're able to pursue our own conception of the good without the type of harms that they're talking about. The last thing I want to talk about is Rosa, when we asked the POI about torture, Rosa talked about being certain, which is actually the CG extension, so we can't really extend on that. But why is that the wrong vision of the ground? We think that I cannot be certain that this table is here. I could be dreaming. I could not know other minds exist. I could not know someone on video camera is not who they say to be because we're all in a turtle's dream. No one can actually prove from first principles every piece of knowledge. There are things of which we are practically certain in life and things that we basically know. We think insofar as this round is literally not defending the ratio of 100 to 1 versus 101 to 1, what we are defending is that we are practically certain that these people did it. We're fine with tons of with guilty people going free because we think we be practically certain that a person did it to lock them up, like Rory said at the top.
Question?
No. So, what is the conception of the liberal society we want to have in this round? Because keep in mind, in your life, all the time, the government could have egregious rights violations to maximize utility, to maximize social outcomes. We don't do it. Even in the cases of terrorism, we think it is abhorrent to torture people, to instrumentalize them and use them solely as a means by literally subjecting them to immense amounts of pain. We think we could conscript teachers and say, you have to teach in inner city schools, you have to do X, Y, and Z, because it would be best for low-income people in our society. We should do more about that. We think we don't actually conscript people and reduce their ability to choose. What we don't do is have doctors cut up innocent people to harvest their organs for other people, right? It's like a trolley problem thing, right? If one innocent person, an unhealthy person, steps into a doctor's office, that doctor could always cut up their organs and give it to 5 people who need an organ transplant that day. We don't do it because in our societies, we do not think of ourselves as a social collective that experiences one sort of good, a sort of maximized utility monster that only has one sort of conception of what is right and wrong. We think the good is much more contingent and subjective from that. Everyone has their own conception of the good. They say crime is really important to certain people, but society isn't just an amalgamated mass. It is made of individuals, and you can't trade off between those individuals. The state needs to provide the basic political, social, and economic rights to everyone. So people need to have life, liberty, pursuit of property, blah, blah, blah. What they can't do is subject certain individuals, conscript them, lock them in jail, treat them abhorrently for a broader social outcome. What you can't do is put someone in jail, take away their livelihood, take away all of their life prospects for the broader social aim of reducing crime. We think that is the exact sort of utility maximizing that does not happen on our side of the house. So, yes.
Well, but the things like not being assaulted or not having your money taken away are not subject to personal subjectivity, right? So while I appreciate you personally probably don't struggle with that, millions of people do, right? And there's no question that it's bad.
Okay. I am not at all disputing the idea that being murdered, sexually assaulted, or robbed is bad. They're bad. The individuals think they're bad. The question is there an act-omission distinction for the state? And can the state lock certain individuals up for the benefit of other individuals? The idea is, what is the intersubjective trade-off you are doing? Is the state the type of actor that can maximize social outcomes, right? The omission stuff that they're talking about. The PM correctly identifies as the case, yet then spends 30 seconds on it in his speech. The question is, can these states take proactive offense to trade off between people? We say they cannot, and we're the only team that has actually addressed the substance of this motion. Now some extraneous stuff about CG. I think this is largely derivative. Basically, Rosa already said that you never know the principle all the way. Both sides can, so already certainty is out of the round. They say you have a right to life. We've already given you examples of in the status quo. There are tons of things you could do to save people's lives in the status quo. If you wanted to be like Singapore, the Soviet Union, and kill drug dealers, you would save a lot of lives. Or if you wanted to torture people when you knew they were guilty, it would deter a lot of crime. We don't do it because we don't want to instrumentalize people to broader social goals. Well, then the next thing they say is that the type of recompense you get is bad. So that if you're guilty of a crime, you've been subjected, the state has done bad stuff to you, you don't get any recompense if that person is out walking in the street. We think this is also largely directed of OG, who tells you that you can't walk around with your sexual assault driver going out. But even if you wanted to vote on this argument, why is this wrong? We have a civil court to give people recompense. Civil courts can determine what are these sort of balance of probabilities between individuals. What the state and the criminal law is for is if you have violated the social contract, that you have done something outside the ambit of the law. That means that the violation is not to the individual. The violation is not the person that was wronged has a right to get what is back for them. That is the social maximizing that is the premise and faulty premise of their case. What they needed to prove to you is not that this is best for the victims, that is not that this was best for society, that it was best for the social contract and the individual's pursuit of the good. They have categorically failed to even realize that's the question.
I'd like to take that speech and invite the governor to say as well.
Is everybody good? So John comes up here and he gives a great and incredibly compelling is-ought fallacy about how we don't instrumentalize people to save other people, which is why we shouldn't do it in the future. Our entire case, up and down government bench, is that we would prefer a world in which we instrumentalize one innocent person and save tons of people in the process, right? Let me tell you why that's true. First, on the principle, all rebuttal will be integrated, as I'm honestly not entirely sure what CO adds to this debate. If Ott believes it is better, like if CO specifically believes it is better to let 100 guilty men go free than one innocent man go to jail, they must, by their own principle, also believe, given that it's pretty difficult to quantify the harms in terms of like each individual person, believe that like 1,000 or 1,000,000, as Danielle told you, people should go innocent, guilty people should go innocent in the favor of one innocent person staying out of jail, right? If that is true, they must defend the certainty on the burden of proof, right? John gets up here and he tells you all about practicality and how we don't know if humans even exist, right? Their side of the motion is to defend the certainty of proof before somebody is sent to jail. If you believe that it is important to save 100 or to save one innocent people at the expense of 100 guilty people being able to cause harm in the rest of society, you must believe it's pretty damn important to get it right. If you believe it's so fucking important to get it right, and you're either not certain of anything, then you definitely shouldn't have this policy, and the justice system is fucked already, or you should just send everybody to jail and actually instrumentalize those people to get the change you're looking for. Before I get into my summation, sure.
Okay, so we are defending the status quo. Well, beyond reasonable doubt is like 75%. You cannot tell us that we have to defend 100% because that is not the world that we live in. That is not what the current justice system is based on. The reason we have convictions is because
okay, I got it. That's a
possible.
lot of time. I understand that what you're trying to say is that we are defending some alternative justice system, but I don't think you understand that you also need to show me that the current justice system is in fact embodied by the principle that we're debating in order for your side to be status quo, right? Just because everybody believes it and they shout off about how 100 innocent people, 100 guilty people being free is better than one innocent man going to jail, that doesn't mean that the actual system that exists represents that principle, right? That's exactly what we tell you, and exactly why John's extension doesn't matter in this round, right? Because insofar as the system that exists right now does not embody a principle that values innocence so highly, insofar as we send innocent people to jail all the time, and we just don't seem to care about this, we tell you that it is your burden to defend either, one, why the status quo is in fact in line with this principle, and then defend the status quo, or defend this principle on its own. Given that you have not done either, we tell you you lose the round. Let's talk about the principle, right? This principle comes out in OG, and it's obviously one of the most important things in this round for both teams, right? Insofar as we can tell you, it is principally justified to put one innocent person in jail to save all of the harms that exist from having 100 guilty people in society. We easily win this round, irregardless of any kind of practical benefits, right? Because we can tell you that it is principally just to save these innocent people. And Danielle, up and down the government bench, and even in the opposition bench, we get great warranting as to why it's so fucking bad when 100 guilty people are free. It's bad for the people that they wronged when they were committing crimes, right? Like quite literally the people who live in constant fear, whether you believe that's derivative or not, I don't actually care, because it wins government bench the debate. We tell you that that is fucking bad. We also tell you that a criminal is much more likely to commit a second crime than an innocent person is is to be transformed into a criminal in jail, right? The United States is a particularly pernicious penal system, but as opening government tells you about Sweden or many other Western liberal democracies, prison isn't always that bad. Yes, probabilistically, I believe Rory's conception that prison is bad and that maybe you end up in prison in the developing world. But we tell you it is not so bad for this one individual person that it is literally 100 times worse than the harm that would happen if they didn't go to prison, right? The motion explicitly sets up a ratio for innocent to guilty people. While I agree that that is not the entire crux of the debate and it should not be a voting issue, I don't think it's fair for UP to come up here and tell you, oh, we don't care about the ratio. Like, the ratio is part of the debate. Yes, we also need to defend the system that leads to the ratio, but you need to defend why it's 100 times worse for one innocent person to go to jail. Let's talk about the criminal justice system, how this impacts that. But first, I'll take backup if you have one. Okay, great. So the criminal justice system is impacted in a variety of ways, but most pertinently by the new stance for evidence, right? By the new evidentiary requirements to ensure such certainty before you put innocent people in jail, right? We tell you that if you want to be so certain that no innocent people are ever going to jail because it is such a nebulous, undescribable harm that you must necessarily, no thanks, you had your chance, necessarily engage with this idea that people who are innocent and going to jail are being wronged in this horrible way, right? If that is so true, you can never send any innocent people to jail. You can't get away with a different ratio. If you can't ever send any innocent people to jail, I don't care if we're living in a simulation, I don't care if it's practically real, you can't do it on your side of the house. That's just not how it works, right? So the justice system now has a new evidentiary requirement, which practically also has really important impacts, as Danielle tells you, you'll never be able to actually punish anybody, right? Nobody can ever be prosecuted for crimes because there is no certainty on your side of the house. At the point at which we've eliminated the literal existence of the justice system on your side of the house, I find it pretty difficult for you to make compelling arguments about how the justice system is more effective. Sure, you can try and tell us, oh, we didn't, like, this justice system still exists, and like maybe that is actually how it will play out in real life, right? Like if you keep the justice system on your side of the house. But then you need to prove to me, if you keep it, why it leads to better outcomes, right? And given that I've explained to you why we're principally fine with using people and instrumentalizing them for the greater good, I don't think you're ever going to win that it's 100 times worse, right? The only thing that's left is this practical harm, that the actual damage done to one person or the crimes that they will commit in the future and then hurt other people is worse than the damage to society when you have 100 guilty people out of jail. These are people you know, crucially, if you know are guilty, right? So if you know they're guilty, you know that they've committed at least one crime in the past. I find it incredibly unlikely, or at least very hard to believe, that these 100 people who have, with knowledge, or certain knowledge, committed a crime in the past, will be less likely to commit more crimes in the future than one innocent person who goes to jail and, like, hypothetically gets out of jail and then will become this criminal, right? I think what's much more likely is this person who goes into jail probably has a 50% chance of becoming a criminal when they go out, maybe even a 75% chance. But there's a ratio of one of them to 100 other people. So when you have 100 other people who you know are criminals and you know have a really high likelihood to do something bad while they're still roaming free, we tell you we'd rather fucking lock them up and take an innocent person with them.
I'd like us to debate feel
Lots of normative assertions in this debate. Very few normative arguments absent John's speech. If opening would like to come up with an answer to either the separateness of persons or the fact that you cannot legitimately adjudicate people's goods from the point of view of the state, I'll happily take that POI. Closing refuse to engage in the substance of these arguments. Let's dismiss the closing extension first. Then I'm going to explain to you what our arguments are and why we're beating the opening argument. What does that look like? Closing extension. The first argument they make is that 1% equals 0.0001%. This argument refutes itself. Next piece of the extension. They tell you that victims are hurt, that people are going to, people need to know that their accuser is put in jail, otherwise it's very traumatic. A couple reasons not to believe this. First, like, going through a criminal trial is incredibly traumatic, even if you win. It is very unclear this is the correct path to healing for every single person. This is like a necessary step or the most relevant step for you in making sure this happens. Second, a lot of these people won't win anyway because they don't meet a standard that develops proof. Third, if you want to pursue this, go to civil court where you already have this standard. You can get massive monetary damage to people, you can get the recognition and the hearing out that they tell you they want. And fourth, the thing that a victim is owed by the state is not the punishment of their accuser. It is the access to a process that we explained to you in terms of the contractual nature of the state and its security elsewhere. So sure, the state owes you an effective police force. The state should be stopping crimes from being committed against you. But that doesn't mean that the state must act in a specific way against every person who has possibly committed a crime. The solution that they choose to the fact that something wrong has been done to victims is just the wrong solution. So, let's get to the subsidy section. Before that, sort of two extraneous things. A lot of debate over the issue. Math. There's a question about exactly what it means to care about 1 in 100 persons. So the way it works is this. There is not a roulette where, like, you're found guilty and then there's a 1 in 100 chance that you go to jail. Rather, there are broadly two sorts of cases in the criminal justice system. Cases where you reach the threshold of practical certainty that John described to you, which is something you act on every day, i.e. you have multiple confirming witnesses, you have CCTV footage, you have the necessary burden of proof that sends people to jail every day in all of the countries that operate under the Blackstone principle. The second set of cases is cases where reasonable doubt exists, i.e. although GovBench treats this person as presumptively guilty, we genuinely do not know from the point of view of the court whether that person is the 1 or the 99. That is it the guilty people? Is it the innocent people? We tell you, as the court, you must treat that person as though they're the innocent person. We've given you that warrant. But remember, although we in the debate know that that entails letting guilty people free, there is never a case where the court intentionally lets a guilty person free. The reason that you act on this principle is because of uncertainty. Cool. Second extraneous argument, whether this intervenes on your ability to feel safe in your day-to-day society. This is the question you should ask yourself. Is the reason for a person who has a fear of crime, this person will be prosecuted, but they will get off because of the standard guilty beyond reasonable doubt? At the point where you think the answer to that question is no, then this motion is not the reason for that person's fear of safety. The reason for the fear might be under-policing of an area. It might be that there are societal reasons for people to doubt that crimes happen against you, or for people to be biased against you in a particular direction. But the source of the fear is not the principle that the state will sometimes let people off because of a standard of reasonable doubt. Finally, they have this argument that, like, everyone cares about maybe being a victim, but not about maybe being a criminal. The problem is, that's only true at the point where you think false accusations of crime don't work. If you live in a society where it's routine or semi-routine for people to be going to jail with a lowered standard of doubt, that people genuinely wonder whether that person was innocent or not, i.e. there is a reasonable doubt about that person's guilt, you then have the fear on your day-to-day activities, that is, I could be sent to jail under this standard. You don't know what it takes to constantly prove yourself innocent, because there is, by fact, no way to constantly prove yourself innocent. You didn't do the crime, that's not good enough for the court in their world. Is this a normative argument yet? No. Okay. So let's go to the normative argument. A couple things on this. They give you the actual mission distinction. They say for the state, everything is one. This argument should be weird to you on face. Why is that? Because the things that they equate are the state sending someone to jail versus a different person harming a different person. Note that neither of those actors are the state. And the place that the state should be intervening on that crime is not by preemptively putting someone in jail ever, but only ever by responding to a crime. So the only crime that they say the state has omitted in failing to prevent is the recidivism, i.e. the fact that you recommit a crime. But recognize that in the original crime, you should see the state had no duty to jail someone prior to their commitment of the crime. It is not the crime in itself that the state has failed in, it is the response to the crime that the state has contractually worked out with people. Why is that the right way to adjudicate this system? First, there is no communal good. There is no way for us to look across a society and say, you know, everyone's decently happy enough today, so I think we're doing great. Because the people who are struggling within that society are bearing a burden that is relevant solely to them and entirely to them. That is, the person who's struggling doesn't look around and say, like, I'm real happy that the average level in my society is sort of mostly that innocent people have good things happen to them. Rather, for each person, the only salient feature of their interaction with the state is how they are treated. Second, though, because we tell you the state doesn't know the goods of people, because under a liberal society, you must accept that people have a diverse range of things that they care about, a number of legitimate ways to live their lives that don't go your single pathway. Sure.
people don't differ in a sense that they all agree they don't want to be victims of crime. This is not something that is subjective. So instead of saying the state shouldn't intervene in our way, can you explain why?
Yeah, so you know what else people all agree on? They would love to not go to jail despite being innocent. The question here is a balance of the probability. How much do we prioritize the innocent person over the state? We have given you the answer in the form of a process. What a state owes you is a level of certainty in its adjudication about how you are determined to be innocent or guilty. What is that level of certainty specifically? That level of certainty says that because the power of the state is opposed to you, the state has a fact-finding power. There are reasons that are not racial, sort of the contingent features of your society, but inherent features to a prosecutorial system that says you are likely to be perceived as someone who is doing wrong. Then the state owes you the entire burden. Additionally, though, we say the justification for punishment is the wrong that you did. So the state must demonstrate not just that there is a general probability that you did the wrong, but rather that you are the actor connected to this in order to do this. Why is this correct? Because the thing that the state provides for people is a forum within which we adjudicate responsibility. It has a forum within which that civil responsibility is lower. That is civil court. We are perfectly happy to have people pursue cases there. But the reason that criminal court is different is the threefold arguments we have given you. First, the idea that your opponent is a state that is over-resourced and under-constrained by a majority. Second, the idea that the state's legitimate power has to do with your consent into that system. That is the idea that the state facilitates a good life for you personally, rather than your society as an aggregate whole. And third, the idea that the forum itself is a way of adjudicating failures in the state. We're fine with additional policing. We're fine with reforms to civil society generally. We tell you, let innocent people free.